Okay. I have an idea. Okay, welcome to Thought Garden on the Air, where we explore the stories, strategies, and skills that shape the most compelling personal brands and talented professionals today. I'm your host, Alexis Quintal, CEO and owner of Rosarium. We're a personal branding and public relations firm that's dedicated to helping entrepreneurs, business leaders, and media influencers monetize and elevate their personal brands. So for season 2, we're really excited to expand our focus beyond authors and into the broader world of personal branding and talent management. So whether you're an entrepreneur, an influencer, or an expert building your unique narrative, we're here to amplify your voice. And today we're speaking with Mark Parker. He's a journalist at the St. Pete Catalyst. Mark has been with the St. Pete Catalyst for almost 5 years, and he's most known for covering local government, affordable housing, and environmental news and information. So welcome, Mark. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. So let's jump right into your background. So share a little bit about like what led you to journalism and the St. Pete Catalyst.
Well, that would be a very long story if I started from the beginning. But I've always been the type of person that I've always wanted to do several different things, and sometimes that's a good thing. But then sometimes you just really need to decide on something, and I just struggled to really decide on one thing, and kept trying new things. And I was about 35 and not married, no kids, and I thought if I was going to really kind of chase a dream, so to speak, that now was the time to do it. And this was about 5 years ago now. So I started going back to school for the third time here at University of South Florida, St. Petersburg.
Nice.
And I love the campus, the waterfront campus. And so, I wasn't naive to the whole news situation, right? And how things have been going over the last decade or two now. And, so I didn't want a strictly journalism degree. So my major was mass communications with a focus on journalism and media studies. But all my electives were either in, business or government or civics, something to that effect, right?
Okay.
I wanted to make sure I didn't, paint myself into a corner with my degree. And, to be honest, I really didn't expect to not just be making a decent living as a journalist, but, in 5 years or so, be so involved with the community and everything that's going on here in St. Pete. And, it doesn't seem like it when you're caught up in the day to day, but, like talking to you right now and looking back on it has been a bit of a whirlwind, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Really cool.
And the reason why is, honestly, I've always loved to write about almost anything in any kind of format. It's just something I've always liked to do. And maybe even a little bit more so than that, I've always enjoyed talking to people. And, I'm one of those people that I thoroughly enjoy just meeting strangers and having meaningful conversations with them and, learning new things about life and each other. And so now I get to do both. I always tell people that building relationships, obviously you have to be a pretty good writer, but I almost think that building relationships might be more important because, people aren't going to talk to you unless they trust you. And they're certainly not going to tell you certain things off the record and that sort of stuff unless they really trust you. So.
Right. You're really getting into the nitty gritty of what's going on. And part of that does have to do with building trust. I heard someone say recently, like relationship currency. I think that's kind of a cool, like trendy term. Like it's really true. Like those relationships you build are the most valuable part of not only your professional life, but even personal life too.
It really is. You always hear, it's not about what you know, it's about who you know. And I mean, it's both, but there's just so much truth to that.
Yeah. Well, now you can just use AI for what you know. And now, so maybe it's even more important who you know. You can't really use AI for that.
That's a great point. And, I'm not trying to, I want to edit that part. I caught myself. So a lot of people nowadays, they'll strictly just copy a press release, right? They'll rewrite a press release. And don't get me wrong, press releases are invaluable, especially when you're writing multiple stories every day. But, we always go out of our way to actually talk to somebody. And that goes back to what we were just saying, anybody could rewrite, especially a well-written, thorough press release. But it's, it takes a little more to get people to talk to you and want to talk to you, want to talk candidly to you. So,
yeah. Well, I think press releases too. I know this wasn't necessarily on our list of questions, but I have so many thoughts about press releases. Like, people want to read less but get more information, right? Like, you've got those like 10 seconds of their attention span, and press releases are not long, but I mean, it's a lot of information crammed in. So what do you prefer, like a press release or a good, strong, like one paragraph pitch?
That is a great question. I guess it just kind of depends on the situation, which I know isn't, a great answer, but, with if everything in a perfect world, if you have, everything's aligned, then just a quick little paragraph, right, would be great. And then I would do the rest, because that's not only part of the fun is figuring out the story, but I almost feel like, when you have those real long press releases, that's the story, right? Very rarely are people going to stray too far off of that. And I mean, I still do sometimes, and I'm sure other people do occasionally as well. But it's almost better to, I don't know. I approach writing almost like art, which may be the right way for what we do and the way things are nowadays. But I'd much rather go in with a blank slate and let the conversation or the meeting or the event, whatever you're covering, dictate what the story is going to be. And I feel like when everything's outlined for you, it's not, now you're, painting by number, to keep
right. You have more creativity, room for creativity if it's, not already been painted for you, right?
But the flip side of that is when you're writing multiple stories every day, and you're, you're in a rush, you're trying to make deadline. It's really nice to have that information there.
True.
Especially
it is a good resource.
Especially basic information like, when did a company launch? When did this, basic stuff that, it adds up if you got to take the time to Google it or research it. And so being able to flip to a press release that has that. And then the last thing I'll say too real quick is, when something does have a press release, which a lot of my stuff, there isn't one at all, right? There isn't a pitch, there isn't a press release, there's nothing. But when there is, I always make sure that my questions don't overlap with that, right? Like, you already have that information.
True.
So,
right.
Yeah. So I guess
allows you to get right to the point.
Yeah.
Well, and so all the roles you could have chosen in journalism, what made you most interested in local journalism and really more community focused?
I honestly feel like it's the most important to daily life.
True.
I mean, the big issues nationally, like, of course they affect you in some ways, especially eventually, you'll get some kind of effect. But, I feel like pretty much everything I write about, or damn near any local news, is going to affect your everyday life, or at least your neighbors, or,
Which could affect you, right? I mean,
yeah, no, it's just literally hits closer to home, right?
Yeah.
And the other part of that, is, I'm really into government and politics, but exponentially more so local government and local politics. And I feel like historically it's starting to change a little bit. But historically, you haven't had such a partisan divide, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of thing locally. And, while that's crept in some over the, in recent years, most local races, unfortunately, the county will tell people, the county commission will tell people your party, your political party, but for the city races, it's all nonpartisan, right? And again, that was crept in, but when you look at the way things are in the state and nationally, it's nothing like that, right? Like more often than not, people really just want to see their community do better.
Right.
Whereas
Exactly.
on the state and national level, there's just so much underlying stuff going on.
Right. Yeah. So it sounds like you consider yourself pretty lucky to be on the local level.
Yeah. Every once in a while, and we're like very local too. So
Right.
every
I mean, it's like one like small city.
yeah,
Right?
and yeah, so there's on occasion it's like, oh well, it would be nice to write about something I'm passionate about on the state or national level, but if I could only choose one, it would be local.
Right.
And there's just sorry, I was just gonna say, I mean, not nationally, it's like a dime a dozen, right? Like everyone's got either actually got a job writing about it, or they got a social media channel or something talking about those issues. And I just feel like locally, and it sucks because I feel like local news is so important, but there's such a dearth of it nowadays that I feel like you really are making a difference, right?
Yeah, you are making a difference. So thank you for everything you do. You led yourself into that. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious to talk to you about personal branding. That's kind of what we specialize in, and it's still kind of a newer-ish term. Is that something that you're hearing about at all? Like, what do you think of when you hear personal branding on the media side?
I mean, I think it's hugely important, right? And it's just really important nowadays. Like, social media is such a big deal. I think just about everyone has multiple social media channels, personally and through their employer. And, some people have more time than others. Not just more time than others, but also just they want to be out there and build that brand more so than others. I realize the importance of it, and I definitely share like just about all of my work, whether it's actual stories or like meetings and stuff, and pictures with people. But it's almost, I don't know, as much as I do already, it's almost like in this day and age, I feel like I should be doing more. Like I don't have a TikTok, for example, right? I'm not.
You don't need a TikTok.
Yeah, I don't think so either. But some people do, right? They're like, oh,
if it makes sense for them. I always kind of tell even like entrepreneurs, like pick 2 social media platforms, right? Get really good at 2 and be strategic about which 2 you're selecting. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I just like this one. Like, what is your goal for your personal brand and your business? So I know you're active on LinkedIn. I think that makes sense for you. You're kind of seeing what's going on in the business community.
Yeah, and this actually ties in with what you just said about being strategic. I'm just going to be honest. I'm always probably more honest than I should be, but I never really liked LinkedIn, right? For the longest time, I
love LinkedIn.
I thought people will wait for it. So I thought people were pretentious, and it was just
right.
But I also didn't really ever use it, right?
Yeah.
And so once I did start using it, I'm like, wow, this is invaluable for all kinds of different things, right?
Right.
And then something else I started noticing is a lot of times, like say Facebook, for instance, like I don't know, like 2,800 quote unquote friends. But I share stories and I don't get much reactions on LinkedIn. I
Oh,
started
okay.
sharing stories on, or I'm sorry, I said that backwards. I share stories on Facebook and I have like
Okay.
2,800 quote unquote friends and they don't get much
Yeah.
reactions. I
Yeah.
share it on LinkedIn and I mean, it's been going up now because I use it a lot more. But, I remember at one point when I first was making a big deal about this, I only had like 300 connections on LinkedIn and my stories would get way more attention and reactions
Hmm.
and views and stuff than they would on Facebook, which I've been using since it came out, have all these, once again, quote unquote friends. Um, so,
There's a reason for that. I feel like I know the algorithms really well. It makes sense to me that like your articles would do better on LinkedIn. I think it's just people spend more time reading on LinkedIn. They're usually on desktop, which is kind of just easier to digest news and information. And the algorithm wants to show even like week old content to people. If people keep liking it, it gets bumped back to the top of your feed. Where on Facebook and Instagram, you kind of have that like 2 seconds when you post for it to like go viral or it's
yeah,
gone. So yeah,
that's a
that's
good
part of
point.
I love LinkedIn. I hope they don't change that because it's one of the reasons why I use it, and it's one of the like compliments I get from people when I meet them in person.
Yeah, that's a great point. And one thing else I'll say, which I've learned, like this is even more recent, like in the last several months, is Reddit's been a gold mine for me as far
Yeah,
as getting views,
really.
like just an
Oh,
insane amount. Yeah, like it's shocking. I
okay.
think I get more views when I share stories to the St. Petersburg subreddit than like our entire website and social media channels combined. You know?
Really
Yeah, I had this wake
interesting.
story the other day. It was up to, I haven't checked it in a couple of days, but it was up to 90,000 views in like 2 days.
Oh,
And
wow.
maybe it has 20,000 on our website, right? And don't get
Yeah.
me wrong, we have our newsletter, which goes out to several thousand people and stuff like that. But still,
Mhm. Yeah.
I wrote a story about, the St. Petersburg losing Major League Baseball when it looked like the Rays deal was really off. Thank God we're a little bit. It's improved. The situation's improved a bit since then. But either way, I think it's like 140, 170,000 views the last time I looked at it.
Yeah.
So just and for us, that's a lot, right?
Yeah.
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 I mean, local publication, St. Petersburg's not that big. Which, granted,
Right.
it's kind of a national topic
It's
too.
sports. Yeah, it does impact people outside of Tampa.
But anyways, that was my hey, if you don't already share stuff to Reddit that you want people to see,
Good.
you
Yeah,
should
that's a good call out.
yeah.
Well, so I want to ask you too, kind of back to the personal branding. A lot of leaders locally are interested in growing their personal brands, becoming more known, becoming a thought leader. And so by getting featured in like a St. Pete Catalyst article, something like that is huge for their brand, right? You do, like you said, you have thousands of daily readers and, people are visiting the site. So what do you look for in that? Like, what's a tip you could give someone who's looking for that kind of media coverage?
I mean, just reach out and I mean that's sounds so simple, but
I know, right?
reach out directly. You know what I mean? Um,
Yeah.
and I'm sure every other publication has a email address on our website. And
Hmm.
not to bring up Reddit again, but just the other day, I think it was Saturday, somebody was on there, said that they had just started a business. I forget what it was off the top of my head, but apparently it was a business to business platform, and he had already had, according to him, he had already had like a couple thousand downloads, and was looking for tips of how to get news coverage. And I told the guy, I'm like, well, DM me, some information and like a link to your platform or whatever, and I'll see what I can do. And to my knowledge, he hasn't. Well, he replied in the LinkedIn thread, but
Hmm.
he never
Right.
actually DM'd me, right?
Right. Yeah.
Uh,
You have to make that extra effort.
yeah, and you also want to make sure people aren't full of crap, right? Um,
Yeah.
people exaggerate or this and that, so you kind of got to do a little homework. But anyways, um, yeah, reach out and have that stuff ready, right? Like have your elevator pitch ready. Like this is why
Right.
I think this would be a good story. You
Right.
know, if you make it up to the person that potentially is going to write about you to like figure out why they should write about you, it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, especially if you don't reach out at all, it's definitely not going to
And then
happen.
yeah,
But
zero reach
I
out.
think people maybe just have this fear that, like, I'm not good enough to get media coverage. Why would they care about me? Or, maybe just think like, hey, they're getting thousands of emails a day. They're probably not even really like reading them or checking them. But you're basically saying all of that.
Yeah, no, I mean that's a good point, but I guarantee we do check them, and we
Yeah.
do look at them, even if it takes a little while.
I mean, you're looking for that kind of information,
Yeah,
and especially
and then
on a local scale.
that's exactly what I was just about to
Yeah.
say. That
Yeah.
goes to the benefits of local publications.
Right.
That's what we're here for. We want to highlight that kind of stuff.
Right.
You
Because
know,
I think I've even pitched you before, and it was more of like a Tampa story, and you were like, "Is there a St. Pete tie-in? Maybe I can work with this." But
yeah.
there's obviously parameters that you have to follow, but you're always willing to get creative on how to tie it back to St.
And
Pete as
that's
the
and
community.
yes, and that's exactly right. And that's what people should honestly do is
Yeah.
you know pitch it and whatever, find out why not, right? If they can't write about you, find out why not, and then come back and try it again if if
Mm-hmm.
you have a way around that.
And there's lots going on. I'm sure even if your January campaign or your January goals didn't work out, try February. There's so much going on in business, and so many things you can try to pitch, right? Try to turn into a story.
Yeah, yeah. And sometimes, so real quick, I was talking to the president of a nonprofit, and it was about the planting trees that we lost during the storm. We lost a lot of trees during Hurricane Milton.
Yeah. Oh,
And,
yeah.
her group also does a lot of work with Egmont Key, which has just been in complete disarray since the hurricanes, and nobody seems to be doing anything to address it. And I'm like, I would love to write about that, but because it's Egmont Key, it's closer to Bradenton, and I think technically for whatever reason Hillsborough County manages it. I'm like, I don't,
Oh,
I don't know. Kind of the same thing that I was saying. I'm like, if you could come up with a St. Pete angle or an angle more local to us, I
right.
could probably do it. And she's like, well, the county just built that ferry or extended the ferry dock from Fort DeSoto, and that runs back and forth, and that hasn't been running either because nobody can go on the island. And I'm like, that is a great idea. And so,
Yeah.
and it worked, right? I
Yeah.
told awesome, like, look, I know we probably wouldn't do this, but here's this. He's like, oh yeah, that does make sense, So,
Right.
so
I
yeah,
love that.
exactly what
Yes.
you're saying.
No. Well, so what about you? It's 2025. Do you have any personal goals as a journalist this year that you're looking to work on?
Here's me probably oversharing again. I would love to. I would love to make more money and work less, but
Well, right. Isn't that everyone? Didn't we go through this whole thing last year? It was like a 4-day work week, and some
yeah.
people implemented it, and now we're
Well,
probably back to 6 days.
yeah. Well, that's the thing. Pretty much anybody would say that too.
Right.
And
Exactly.
you know, obviously, I'm passionate about what I do, so it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah.
But that being said, I mean, anything outside of those two things, which would be really nice, um, I don't really have anything, and maybe I should.
Yeah.
Maybe I
You
should
can set
set
some
like a
goals.
number, like, oh, I want to hit this many views or reads or something, or
Yeah. Or is there any like topics or themes you've never covered that you've always wanted to?
not really locally. No,
Okay.
I write like 11 stories a week, and I don't
Wow.
really take much time off, so
You've covered everything.
stuff. Or at
Yeah.
least, obviously things evolve, right? So the topic, it might be the same topic. It's just what's new about this. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'd love to cover the city working out what it's going to do with the Rays and the gas plant redevelopment.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess we'll have some finality on that by March.
Yeah.
But that's been a long ongoing thing that I would really like to see get wrapped up one way or another.
Right.
Sooner rather than later. Yeah, I just really isn't much that I haven't already covered. And
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're pretty on the ball. Like what's going on in the city, you're on top of covering it and getting in front of a lot of the right people. Is anyone you'd want to meet that you haven't met?
Locally?
Yeah.
I hate saying it like this, but I pretty much met everybody that, I really can't think of anyone locally that I want to meet that I haven't already met, right?
Yeah. Have you actually met like players on the Rays?
Which is weird. Oh yeah, I've been in the locker room and stuff like that, and
that's awesome.
Do stuff like that whenever I want to. Like I'm not a sports reporter, right? So I usually take advantage of my connections unless I'm doing a story about it, right?
Right.
So not that often where I have a reason to like go hang out in the locker room, and of course we can't do that anytime soon, at least not at Tropicana Field.
I know, right?
I don't get to cover the Bucks much, but I would love to do that with the Bucks, But
True.
then again, I'm typically covering like some kind of human interest story or something with like the stadium deal or something like that versus like, games themselves.
Yeah.
I don't get a chance to do that much. Now, when they're in the playoffs, when the Rays and the Tampa Bay Rowdies are in the playoffs, then I do cover the games. And then, I go and meet the players and the coaches and all that fun stuff, which is awesome. That never gets old, by the way. For a guy like me who grew up playing sports. But we don't really do the Bucks like that because, they play in Tampa. So, I'd love to be able to do that one day. Hopefully one day.
Yeah. See, there we go. There's a goal.
I'm really looking forward to the Grand Prix. I always get to meet the racers and go behind the scenes and in the pits.
Is that February?
That is actually, technically it's a 4-day thing now. It starts February 28th and the actual race is on March 1st or March 2nd.
Okay.
So that's cool, but this will be like my 5th or 6th year doing that.
Yeah.
It's always cool, but just, I've already done it. Gosh, I thought I was, that's what I was going to say. So to give you at least some kind of answer for goals, and this is going to be so like vanilla or whatever, but to be better, right? Like I always strive to be better. And, no matter how good you think you are at something, you can always be better.
Right.
And it's the consistency too, because you might just be killing it one day. And I mean, I think it's human nature, but, and then the next day you might make some dumb mistakes or, I'm the kind of person, which a lot of this goes back to time, which we just don't have writing as much as we do. But a lot of times, I'll go back and read something that, that night or like a couple of days later, and I'm like, oh, I wish I would have said that differently, and
okay.
And so that's it. Like and I think that goes for, pretty much any profession, right? You always want to get better and identifying ways to get better.
Right. I love that.
So again, not real specific goal, but definitely a goal.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good one for sure. Do you have any other like final tips for listeners when it comes to like media coverage, maybe any do's or don'ts or how to engage with you? Be a good kind of takeaway for them.
I mean, it kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier. Everything we've been saying is, put yourself out there. Go to events. I meet a lot of people. I'll go to an event to cover one thing. And if I happen to hear a presenter that has something cool that I had no idea about, A lot of times I'll talk to them like, hey, let's do a story. Like, yeah, I'm going to do this story about everything that happened, but let's do a story just on your thing. And vice versa too. I've had a lot of people come up to me after events. They're like, "Oh, you're Mark. You right?" I'm like, "Oh, hey, well, listen to this, right? Or check out my website. Check this out." And so yeah, that's it. And
okay, and you don't mind that? That doesn't.
No, not at all. I mean,
Okay.
not at all. That's what we're here for, right?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, and
that's good to know.
The other thing too is, I get so many emails on my work email. And probably 80% of them are people throughout the world and the country, and it's just the most random stuff. Which sometimes, hey, come stay at our resort or something, or like come check out this new hotel and new development or hotel in New York City or something. I'm like, that would be awesome, right? But I just don't have the time to do it. And but where I'm going with this is we get so much stuff, like just random emails, that kind of thing. That it's not in our community. It's not really what we care about, right? If we're already at an event or somewhere and they're there, then that's that's one thing going for you automatically, because we already know that you're local. We already know that you're at least somehow involved in things that we already care about and write about. So, I mean, that's a boost right there. And, I'd much rather talk to people in those kind of scenarios than sift through another 100 emails every day.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so yeah, good suggestion. Put yourself out there. Don't be afraid to walk up to you and just introduce themselves, and you never know where that can lead.
Amen.
And so where can our listeners kind of see your work, follow you, give us the rundown on that?
So stpcatalyst.com.
Okay.
We have, it'll probably show up the first time you go there, but we have a newsletter that goes out at around 4 p.m. every day. Our website and the newsletter are completely free. You just got to put in your email for the newsletter. But we're completely free. We only have a couple of ads because my publisher, which I think is really cool, doesn't want to inundate people with ads. We have 0 like pop-up ads. You know what I mean? So we're really trying to do a service here. And so stpcatalyst.com, sign up for the newsletter. I probably should know the answer to this, but on LinkedIn, I think I'm just Mark Parker on LinkedIn, and you'll see the St. Pete Catalyst under my name. I have an extra Twitter, which is Mark's Muses, and I do share my Mark's_Muses, and I share my, I share my stories on there, but I just don't. I don't know. I just never really use it that much.
Yeah.
As far as
I mean,
social media,
would really be useful on a local level. I think that's more of a national platform.
No, as far as connecting with people, it's typically for work. It's typically LinkedIn, for friends, Facebook, or to a lesser extent Instagram. But my work email also is mark@stpcatalyst.com. That's all one word, no period. So mark@stpcatalyst.com, and yeah, they can reach out to me directly. I know there's a portal on our website to reach out to. I think it's probably a general email. I don't know if you can email me directly on there. I should probably know that. But you can email me directly with the email address I just provided.
Perfect. I'll make sure to put that in the notes here too, so you can easily copy it. But okay, great. Well, thank you so much for sharing, Mark. With that, we conclude another episode of The Thought Garden. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to follow us on Spotify, YouTube, and social media. Rosarium.work is our handle. So for more inspiring stories and actionable insights like these, hope you'll follow along. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Thought Garden.
Thanks for having me.